So we're here today to speak to Janette Ayachi, um, Saltire Poetry Book of the Year 2019 winner with her first collection, Hand Over Mouth Music. Hi Janette, thank you for speaking to us today.
Hi Wanda, thank you for inviting me to chat.
Well, so we're here to talk about your award-winning collection. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, it's a book that it's my first full collection of poetry. So it's been marinating as memoir for many years. It's an amalgamation of reworked and new poems. And when I accepted the award, I mentioned that I had already published 2 poetry pamphlets, a hardback children's book, and that they were all in boxes gathering dust under my bed. And now this was my first full collection with a spine and a fantastic editor, incredible press, and a big shiny award attached to it.
Fantastic. So what does it mean to you to win the award?
It was a pinnacle for me. Truly, madly, deeply. It would be no understatement if I mentioned it being one of the best things that has happened to my literary career so far, for 2 reasons. It was the realization of a dream, my own, and I'm sure any other writer would agree, for their first book to reach such critical acclaim. It's a celebration, but it's also a solidification to keep writing, and a bonus now to be asked to write instead of trying to push it. What I mean is a landslide of opportunities erupted on my journey since the book was published last summer. The first time I even read from the collection was for a BBC arts program called Loop, where I briefly spoke about writing process for me, and this was in the summer. And then I had the chance to collaborate with all these incredible artists, and then I was shortlisted for the Saltire, and then I won the prize, and then boom, suddenly this gateway to meet and read with idols, to write poetry as commission, to be guest speaker, to be invited into anthologies without actually having to submit first, 2 more further television appearances, a request to be a judge for prizes, to be heard and to be finally included. Because as a writer, we have to have really thick skin. We have to go through a lot of rejection on repeat, no matter the representation. A lot of the processes and administration of self, and being able to share from our personal place, we can unite in a more harmonious collective. But to join this chorus, you have to train your voice first to keep attuned. And you have to be insistent. My favorite project this year has been working with the art consultant Matt Jarrett, working from the sculpture park of Scottish poets at Edinburgh Park, and planning a proposal for the City of Edinburgh Council to name new streets after them, and all the street naming research, the digging into the history and the personal lives of all these Scottish poets, and the conversations that I've had with architects and chairmen and design planners, and feeling very much like a fish out of a suit, out of water myself. But just the excitement around this implantation of poetry in public spaces, in these carbon neutral commercial developments is astounding to me. Poetry gives names to things, not just feelings, but places too. And the zeitgeist and avalanche of 2020 has not prevented me from leaping on that chariot that this award had waiting for me outside the museum that night. I felt it, I believed in it, and the forced isolation has been a blessing, a fertile solitude. The encouragement now to finish my memoir about traveling alone and searching new landscapes and desire, Lona Lust. It's now completed. It's on its final draft, with my prose editor Colin Waters, and my poetry editor Darren Rees Jones. She's sitting with my possible second Pavilion Press collection, Quick Fire, Slow Burning, and it's in our hands, preparing to pluck a collection into form over the next year or two. And I'm looking for an agent, which is really, really hard because it's back to the rejections again, and you don't need an agent for poetry. So if there is an agent out there that's watching this and you want to get in touch to represent me, then definitely do that, because there's another book in its skeletal beginnings called First Sightings, which is a non-fiction essay collection about all the paranormal and occult experiences I witnessed as a child and growing up. So the Saltire, it made me think, this prize, it was like, yes, you can do it, you know, bloody keep going now, type, write, read, feed the children, read, type, write, breathe, write, you know, until your fingers ache from all the channeling and you're covered in ink with all the blood, the ink spurting out of the cartridges, you know, like mania. Even though the prose might not be as enjoyable as and well received as my poetry, you know what, I still have to find out, and I think that's the thrill of it, really.
Fantastic. So it's been a busy year.
Absolutely.
So what inspired you to write poetry?
So I was a sickly child. I was in and out of hospitals. I grew up in London, in the polluted hub of London, and I had really, really bad chronic asthma. And so I used to write dirges and poems for the nurses and doctors, and they used to pin them up on the wall in the ward. I was 11 when I wrote my first poem, and I still have it. And I wrote it on a typewriter, which makes me sound really, really ancient. But I've kept journals since I was 16, documenting life in the only way that I knew how, which was to have it packaged into this baroque, ornate language. I could make sense of the world more, sculpting experience this way. And then at 17, I left for university to study film and English literature. But I used to use Spenser's Fairy Queen as a chair to sit on outside the lecture hall and work my way through a soft pack of Camel blues outside. And I spent more time in the library than I did in tutorials, ignoring the reading list, because I wanted to work with my own choice of all these writers that I had before me in Harvest, in these university libraries. And I became obsessed with monitoring women's experience, not just their work, but their lives. And I think that's why artists like Frida Kahlo and Georgia O'Keeffe just or seem more interesting to me, because they had really quite troubled emotional lives as well that went along with the work that they created. And then I was concerned with crossing borders, and I didn't understand why I was only being shown British literature. You know, the canon should be flexible enough to turn sharp movements. And then I became giddy and verbose and ungrammatical, and I realized I had to hone in on a subject. So I chose poetry, feminism, and postmodernism. And then I started to discover form outside of free verse. And I started studying a master's in creative writing at Edinburgh, and that's why I moved here. And then I wanted to turn all this journal writing that I had harvested, all my travel logs, the essays, the stream of consciousness spill, that I wanted to polish it all into poetic form. And I thought then that abbreviation and training was key, especially for someone who had been harvesting their whole life.
Fantastic. So what's your first memory of books and reading?
My first memory is it's collecting this series from the newsagents that you get, like a magazine and a book. It was called the Great Writers series, and you would get one of the classics of the books in this like kind of faux leather binding, and then you would get this magazine about the book and about the author. And my mother bought me the whole set from a car boot sale on Hampton Heath when I was 12. And I realized then that, like, the voice of Shelley or the Brontes, they made more sense to me than all the voices around me. And the teachers have always been my guide too, the ones that took me aside and congratulated me on this kind of early recognized flair for words. And they gave me books from their private bookshelves, their private collections at home, with these scribbled, klimped postcards inside. And then the ones that highlighted, please see me, and held me back after class and accused me of handing in homework that perhaps my mother had completed for me. So, I was gifted, but there was always some kind of resilience, some kind of resistance. And it wasn't by my own incompetence or self-sabotage, but of society's, the unjust mannerisms of strict religion, a dip into lower class upbringing, and a denouncing of women's power and strength everywhere I turned. Books transported me. They transported me away from the early trauma of these awakenings, and I was a melancholy, lonely child that trailed lamps into closets to read, wanting to be transported mostly, to find something other than, well, just being so frustrated.
Thank you for that. So what was your, is there a book that you return to often?
No, I can't rewatch films either. There's too many alternatives constantly emerging, and there's never enough time. I'm not one to retrace. If the message absorbs for the first time, then I've carried the meaning into my being. I've held it up to the light, and I've been inspired by its beauty. But to return to it, it's like revisiting the past and what has already played out, to know the ending, to have this suspense abandoned for what? A second chance to find a reason and a remembrance of why you pulled it in the first place, to feel, I think that some people say, oh, things are different over time. The second time you read it with a more developed mind, something else will come to you. But I don't think so. I think that we are meant to read what we read when we're meant to read it. And I think the books, they return to themselves often enough. But poetry, I always return to my favorite voices, but just not specifically to one of their collections, a specific collection.
Okay. So that's us come to the end of our questions.
Excellent. You want to ask me what my favorite book was growing up? Remember we were talking, we had a little conversation over email, and you asked me that question. And this afternoon when we started, I said to you, to ask a writer what their favorite book is growing up, is that meant to be a one-word answer? And do you have a favorite book growing up?
I had a favorite book growing up, yeah.
Had one.
Which was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And the reason that was because, and it's my one sort of big claim to fame was that I met Roald Dahl. And down in, it was in a school called Coombs County Infant School, and he came to, I don't think it was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory he came to read, but I just remember sitting, we were in this big assembly hall, cross-legged, listening to Roald Dahl do a reading from his book. And from then, I think that sort of planted a seed for me. And so Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, apart from the Janet and John books, I remember reading them. That was my favorite book.
What alchemy, though, to be read the book from the magician himself. Yes. And as a child, that would have just been, a dream come true, because there's a lot of, but I've got two kids myself, and there's always this kind of idea that there is another world that exists, but we can't really interact with it when we've got screens and we're watching and we're not engaging so much on a more ethereal level. And so when writers actually read their own work, they're able to see exactly, that there's meaning, more meaning. There's actually a physicality behind the text. And it's strange. I never had one. I think also because mine was my hunger again and thirst. I just wanted to read them all and know them all. But I remember I originally lost myself in the pastoral novels, like right at the beginning when I was really, really young and daydreaming. And thinking, you know, what this whole idea of relationships and not really knowing much, because my father is a strict Muslim, and I was sheltered. You know, I learned my life from books basically. So the novels of D.H. Lawrence and Thomas Hardy and Tolstoy, and then when I was no longer seeing myself as a Bathsheba awaiting suitors or under Tess's pronounced misfortune, I took myself out of the maddening crowd of middle-class white novelists, and I drowned in the joy of the macabre, you know, Hogg's malevolent demon, lustrous Gothic settings, telling ticking hearts under the floorboards, and then later the emergence into Anais Nin, her diaries, which still continue to blow my mind. And then I had this infatuation with Vita and Virginia Woolf's letters, Plas Candor, Sexton's intensity, Neruda and his whiplash of odes to the sea, Lorca in New York, Pessoa's persistent pulse and his spirituality, Michael Hoffman reducing me to tears in the bathroom, the women of the left bank, the Beat Generation, the Romantics, the stern modernists, all the other revolutionary thinkers as well, the French female philosophers, Kristeva, Cixous, de Beauvoir, the geniuses, the mad geniuses, the drunks, Thomas de Quincey, Mallarmé, Rimbaud's dance with language from Rossetti to Carol Rumens, Rilke to Stendhal in Florence, and Albert Camus sunbathing in Algeria, Elizabeth Bishop and the potent Emily Dickinson, and Derek Walcott, and then to Elizabeth Wurtzel when I started reading books and writers from my generation. But life's literary archive is the most seriously glorious bouquet. Books are intoxicating. They're ichor from the gods, the heart's most devoted drug.
Wow. Oh, that was an amazing answer. I loved that.
I had it prepared. And that's the great thing about words, is that you get to play with the rhythm, the tonality, and the performance of them sometimes, and they become even more, at least for me.
Well, I don't think I would have been able to remember all that. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Wanda. Thank you for asking me these questions, you know, and opening up those little portals in my mind to think back to why, because it's so important, and we're either lost in the moment because the moment is so consuming, or we're galloping ahead into the future. But yeah, no, it's not very often one's asked to look back. So thank you.